Welcome to the Awaken on Purpose podcast, where each week you'll hear inspirational stories of heart-centered leaders who have awakened to their higher purpose and taken that leap of faith to follow their heart and make an impact in the world. Get ready to be enlightened, empowered, and transformed with your host, Jennifer Spohr.
I'm thrilled to welcome today as a guest, Krista Mollion. She is the founder of the SASSY Method, Seriously, Authentic, Smart, Self-Confident You, a coaching program for busy business people who struggle to do it all, often with many people relying on them who are at high risk for burnout, yet very rarely ask for help. She helps them find and renew their focus, clarity, purpose, and ultimately instill more balance and fulfillment in their lives. She is also the founder of Your Product CEO, a small business consultancy where she uses her 18 years in tech product marketing to help companies build and launch new products and online and offline marketing campaigns that wow their audience and convert customers. Prior to launching her coaching and consulting businesses, she spent nearly 2 decades in digital marketing and tech, most recently as partner at Transparent House, a creative 3D VR agency with A-list Silicon Valley clients like Apple, HP, and Google. She has a podcast, a blog, YouTube channel, and is excited to soon release her first book about her own journey from burnout to balance, where she describes why she created the SASSY program. Her mission is to create a global movement to help people eliminate uncertainty and doubt, see who they were meant to be, and step fully into their destiny. Welcome, Krista.
Jennifer, I'm so happy to be on your podcast. I greatly admire your work and what you do, and I feel truly blessed to be on your show.
Oh, thank you. I feel the same about you. I admire your work as well. I'm really excited to have you with us today, and I know that our listeners are probably dying to know what inspired you to do the work you're doing today. How did you get to where you are now from where you were before you discovered your calling?
I can tell you it was not a linear journey. There were many times that I reached rock bottom. I had a difficult upbringing because my parents were divorced, and I was mostly raised by my grandparents because my mother struggled from mental illness. So she lived in her home and I lived with her parents, my maternal grandparents. And when I hit 11, I was actually sent into shelters and later foster care. So my home kind of fell apart at a very young age. And I had some very traumatic experiences in a very short amount of time, and was forced to kind of grow up quickly. Then my dad came from France and got me and took me back with him, but he was a marine biologist in Africa. So instead of staying in France, I went with him to where he was living at that time, which was the island of Madagascar. And when I tell this story, people are
wow.
Wow. It's like, you know, going from shelters in the Midwest and foster care in the Midwest to a tropical paradise with a rainforest and lemurs running around, that was quite the transformation for me and an eye-opener and a refuge. So if you could wish yourself out of a bad situation and open your eyes and be on a tropical paradise, that's kind of like what literally happened to me in my beginning of my teens. And then later on, I went to Germany and studied in Germany. I went to Russia and eventually got married to a Moscow native and ended up in San Francisco in 2000 because of the tech boom. There were a lot of job opportunities, and having just freshly left college, my then husband was offered a startup opportunity, and I followed him and got right into the startup world, where I stayed for 18 years, 5 of which working for different big tech companies, and then 12 of which I built my own company with 2 partners that was specialized in 3D and later VR, and loved every moment of it until the day that I broke down again, which was actually a progression. So I broke down once about 10 years into my marriage and felt like this was rock bottom. I just lost my direction, my sense of purpose. Then I got myself together and soldiered on for another nearly 10 years before I said, this is it. I can't go any further this time. This time there will be no picking up the pieces and moving on. And I think what really propelled me through all those times was I'm a survivor. From a very early age, I'd made up my mind that no matter what, I'm going to get through these things and find my way. However, for years, finding my way meant trying desperately to be accepted by other people and people pleasing in all the various new locations that I was in. And that's a very harmful behavior to have that led me into a marriage that was mostly based on suppressing my true feelings and some of my true personality traits even in order to comply with the happiness of the household. And one day I just had enough, and my ex-husband and I weren't going to go any further. It was too late. The window had closed. And despite therapy, I asked for a divorce. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done because we have 3 beautiful children together. And I just knew that this was the only way for me to save my soul, if you will. And I'm now on a mission to help other people who, like me, were people pleasers most of their life, and high achievers like me, running a company, having a lot of responsibilities, and then add family into the mix. And you feel like nonstop people are counting on you, and you have to have it always together. So you always have to have your poker face on, and you can't allow yourself to be human anymore because somehow you have to find within yourself nonstop energy and motivation and positivity, when in reality, you're just pushing your own needs down and oftentimes your own desires down for the sake of keeping up this wheel that you've built. And so I got off that hamster wheel and felt more relief than I've ever felt in 40 years. And was wondering, why did it take me so long to give myself permission? Why did I build I built my own glass ceiling. No one forced me to do that. Even my ex-husband, it was me who decided that that was the best way. And that's the saddest thing for me. So I wrote my book, which is soon to be published. And now I'm on a mission through my life coaching program to give people permission to say, this is not a midlife crisis, and I'm not depressed, and I'm not crazy. I'm just a human. And that's okay. And it's okay to put yourself first and not feel guilty about it.
Absolutely. And what you said earlier about soldiering on, I know that so many people, including myself, can relate to that. I know that I have my thoughts on why I think that happens, but why do you think that so many people feel that they have to soldier on? Why do you think that so many people feel they have to suppress what their true desires are?
First and foremost, it's the desire to be loved and accepted, which is instilled upon us from birth. The very first thing you do is hold out your arms, and you're completely vulnerable to your caregiver. And then our whole childhood is based on cues, which are usually punishments and rewards, rules, values, and acceptance and approvals from society. So when that's your whole world of being accepted, and the condition is to follow those rules and to comply with other people who you love, it's normal that in the end we think, well, I need to do what's best for my family or for my church or for my town. And it's easy to lose yourself in that process. And once you're in that process, you start feeling guilt and shame associated with your true self, because deep down you have thoughts that are different from what's going on around you. And you don't allow yourself to feel those feelings because you feel guilt. You think, well, that would hurt someone else's feelings. I can't hurt that person's feelings. I care about them. And the same for your job. We're taught that we're supposed to please our boss, and if you do a good job, you'll get a promotion. And when we realize that maybe our boss is actually not a role model or a leader. Maybe it's a toxic work environment. We just soldier on because we've been brought up that way.
And it starts with making a conscious decision that you want change, right? We need to pay attention to those feelings because those feelings don't go away. They just continue to get stronger and stronger. And that's what I know happened with me when I eventually left my prior career, my company. I already had a plan that was in play to transition away, but I had already stayed too long. And I ended up becoming fed up with the toxic environment and left. And I figured everything out. Here I am today, but that's what happens. Soldiering on does not serve us, right?
Well, there's a lot tied into what you just said. When there is that desire for change, which I like to call your inner voice, your true self is speaking to you, you repress it out of shame and guilt and thinking, I should be grateful. I think there's something that I like to call the golden handcuffs, which is if you do have a good life, it's a lot harder to leave that life than if you were living in misery. And to give yourself permission, despite having a good paid job or a steady income or a good company, is so scary. So not only the guilt and shame come into place, like, oh, I should be grateful. I don't have the right to complain because I have all these things. I should be happy. But then there's also this tremendous fear of losing everything that you've worked hard for. Like, how could I possibly give this up? How could I leave? And those two feelings of like fear and shame mix together and they do not go away. But because we don't want to make a decision, we're overthinking it, trying to repress those feelings. This can go on for years like it did in my case. And the worst part about it is I never felt like I could talk to anyone about those feelings. I didn't even allow myself to really identify them fully. And I really didn't know how to process them. But most importantly, I didn't know how to get support. I didn't know who to talk to. And even should I go there? Should I even talk to people about this? And a few times I did try. I went to therapy. I said, I think it'd be great for my mental clarity. I should seek out some therapy. I also tried a few times to talk to my ex-husband about it. And those attempts weren't successful because I heard from the therapist and my ex-husband some of the things I was afraid I'd hear. You have it so good. You should be grateful. You may be suffering from depression. It's normal. We can fix this. We can medicate you. I heard the things that I didn't want to hear. And no one in that time told me, it's okay. I give you permission to want change, and I will help you come up with a plan to get you out of this step by step and safely without hurting yourself, without hurting others. So what happens during that time of trying to repress these feelings, the desire for change and the unhappiness, is we numb ourselves because those feelings don't go away. And everyone that I've worked with has their numbing tool of choice. So for some people, we numb ourselves by using the money that we have to buy things, lavish ourselves buying things we don't need. And we're like, oh, maybe, shopping therapy is an actual coined term, right? So some people do that. And sometimes it can be actually very dangerous because people actually get into credit card debt. They overspend. And those are all numbing tools. Sometimes it can be really dangerous because it's drugs. It was so easy for the therapist to offer me antidepressants. One session and they'd already offered it to me. I'll write you a prescription right now. I refused, but I was also shocked how quickly they did it. They diagnosed me. Oh yeah, sounds like depression. We'll give you some pills here. And a lot of people in my shoes would take the pills and would use them to numb themselves, maybe even dangerously combining it with alcohol. So what I'm trying to say is, if you feel this desire for change, there's nothing wrong with you. You need to find someone who understands that, who doesn't just offer you pills. And I'm not trying to discredit depression, by the way. I want that to be really clear.
No, but what you're saying is that we're very quick to look outside of ourselves for the solution.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what I'm understanding. And I share your views on that. Most of us have been brought up in a society that encourages us to chase things outside of ourselves for the answer. But the answers are really already within us.
The answers are within us, but we've built ourselves up to feel that other people are counting on us and we can't let them down. We can't let down our parents who are terrified if we leave a well-paying, stable job. We can't let down maybe our mortgage. Maybe we have a mortgage and we're scared, how are we going to pay for it if we quit this job or we leave? Maybe we have a spouse and the spouse definitely doesn't want anything to change. They love the life that you've built together and you're miserable. Then what do? Maybe you have children, they're counting on you. Maybe you have direct reports at work or your boss is counting on you and you're their right arm at work. So there's guilt just builds up and it becomes unbearable. And so to get rid of the guilt, we find ways of numbing it and distracting ourselves. But over time, it just gets worse. And what happens is the numbing tools aren't enough and the cracks start to show. And the cracks are maybe lesser work performance or maybe poor health. People develop actual symptoms like stomach problems, headaches, skin rashes. Your humor goes sour. So you can turn into the meanest person ever and lose friends and damage your relationship with your partner, all because you're not allowing yourself to accept who you truly are.
Absolutely. Every experience in our lives shapes who we become. For you, what has been one of the most significant experiences that has shaped who you are?
Everything in my life ties back into childhood. I have spent a lot of time analyzing my inner child and what are the things that made me most impressionable. And I think that in my childhood, I was a very sensitive child. I didn't talk a lot about it, but things would mark me deeply that maybe from the outside, the people around me didn't understand how deeply those things marked me. I was lucky that I never witnessed any horrific things in my early childhood, but growing up with a mother who had mental illness meant that she said things that were very harmful, and she did become physically violent once in a while. So I think just understanding human nature at a very young age, understanding mental illness was real and not knowing why. And what marked me the most deeply was the sense of somehow these things are all my fault. So guilt was definitely for me a big factor. And that guilt led me to believe that I should people please and I should be the best student. I should try to make people like me everywhere. So no matter what environment I would go into, I would always try to comply. I didn't want to stand out. On the contrary, I wanted to study how the other people dressed and then try to dress like them, try to act like them, because I was terrified of being myself, because I deeply, from the very core of myself, thought that I wasn't lovable and that I had caused my mother to have mental illness. I had caused my parents to get divorced. I had caused my grandparents too much stress so that they had to get rid of me, basically. And so I always felt from a very young age that I need to earn my keep. And when I say earn my keep, it was everywhere. No matter where I would go, I'd be like, I have to be a good girl because they might throw me out. If they don't throw me out, they'll reject me in some way, or they'll figure out who I really am. And who I really am is someone who's not lovable. And now, of course, processing this and talking to you at the age of 42, I have a distance, an emotional distance when I'm speaking. But you can imagine how many years it took me to get to that point and how much pain it caused me to realize that at my core, that's how I felt about myself.
Absolutely. I can relate to what you're saying. I left home at 16 because of my relationship, the dynamic of the relationship with my mom. I didn't know until some years later, though, that she also had a mental illness. And when I found that out, it explained a lot, because at the time when I was a child, I didn't understand why she did the things that she did or behaved in the way that she did. And it takes time to heal something like that. I mean, my message for anyone who's listening would just be that give yourself permission to feel how you want to feel about that and allow yourself to process that. Don't suppress it, because when we suppress those feelings, they eat away at our insides and they manifest themselves in other ways, such as you mentioned, Krista, about, whether it's addictions or something else. So please don't be ashamed of how you feel. Allow yourself to process that so that you can heal.
Well, it also leads to one more aspect that we didn't talk about, but because I'm really vulnerable and I own who I am, I would tell you that another aspect that affected me deeply was romantic relationships. Because of my early childhood of feeling somehow guilty and rejected and unlovable, what do you think I did as soon as I hit teenagehood? I sought out the wrong kind of attention. I sought out love in the wrong places. I picked people who were not good for me because they lavished me with attention and told me I was pretty and made me feel lovable. And that led me down some very dangerous paths in my life. And so early on in my life, I put myself in situations where things were spiraling, out of control. I mean, one time I had a date rape, and this was very traumatic for me. But at the time, I didn't even register how important that event was. And it was a dangerous one too, because this guy had slipped a pill into my drink. And I thought I was drinking Coca-Cola. And the next thing I knew, I was passed out. Luckily, the guy took me back home, but not after he raped me. And, talking about that, I don't really go around talking about that, but I'm fine to talk about it now, especially because there's so much distance and time gone by, and I have a teenage daughter. But at that time, I did not tell a single soul. And I was living with my paternal grandparents in France when this happened. So this happened in France, and I was there only for a year. And I remember just partying and being kind of wild in general. And I remember telling myself that it wasn't a big deal and that it was my fault. And now I think back and I think all the horrible things that could have happened, even worse, because I didn't really love myself. I just was seeking out attention, trying to be the party girl, trying to be the popular girl. And I didn't have any boundaries. I was just people pleasing. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's another thing that's so important. And that's why I'm sharing this with you, is because if you truly feel inside that you aren't lovable or aren't really good enough, then you will let people mistreat you. And you will put yourself in situations where people can harm you, like I did, unwillingly. And now I know that I was a total victim at that point, that was a really traumatic event. But I remember even telling myself, this isn't a big deal. This will pass. And just repressing all the emotions and not having anyone to talk to. Like, well, what am I going to say? Who am I going to tell this to? And deciding that I would keep it for myself. And over all of these years, I think I've told 2 people. I'm putting this in my book, so now it's going to be public information because I don't care. I think it's okay to come out and say it how it is. It's not my fault what happened. What was my fault was not loving myself enough to know that it wasn't okay at the time.
And it's okay. Thank you for talking about that.
You're welcome. I think people need to hear it. People need to know that bad things can happen to good people and you can survive, you can move on. But the main thing is to value yourself so highly that you recognize when things are happening. And now looking back, I am grateful that I had that traumatic experience, but that after that, I was closed off for a long time emotionally to relationships. And it took me so much pain and suffering to understand that it's really so key to love yourself. It all goes back to self-love, because if you love yourself, you're not going to seek permission from others and people pleasing. You're not going to put yourself in situations that you're uncomfortable with or that are potentially dangerous just because you want to be the life of the party, or your girlfriends are going somewhere and you want to tag along because you don't want to be the odd person out, or to accept a drink from somebody who you just met. Those are things that I should have known better, and I didn't, because I really just didn't have that self-love.
And that's true. I mean, really, whether it's starting a business or pursuing or doing anything else in our lives, all roads lead back to how we feel about and treat ourselves.
Exactly. And if you don't love yourself, you can't love others. And when I talk about love, I don't even just mean romantic relationships. So, of course, first and foremost, I'm talking about finding a partner and having a healthy boundaries with that person and having a healthy relationship. But then I'm also moving on to your children. Similarly, your story that I didn't know about your mother relates to me with my mother, hopefully not as traumatic as mine. But if you aren't okay with yourself, you can't parent someone. You can't be a good partner. You can't give love to people in the way that they need all the time. So first and foremost, it all comes back to you. And then spreading that further to what you said, to your career. If you're unhappy inside, you can only keep it up for so long. Like, I've always loved people. I really, truly love people. And because I didn't have that healthy boundary, I always tried to please everyone around me, make everybody happy, clients and bosses, and just make sure everyone was happy. And because of that, people liked me a lot. So I was very likable in my life. But on the other hand, I accepted things that I should have said no to in the workplace. And here I'm talking about taking on more work than I should, offering to do things for people just because I knew how, and I knew that that would help them out. So I was literally mothering everybody around me, even though I was young, because I just felt so obliged to be the one that carried the burden versus saying no and setting up boundaries at work as well. And saying, no, I'm not available this weekend. No, I can't work on Saturday. No, I can't work at Christmas. I really think that everyone listening needs to extend that self-love into their professional life, where they set up healthy boundaries at work.
Oh, it absolutely applies to every area of our lives. And what I want to mention briefly on that note as well is that we have a tendency to put our relationships with others, to put those people in our lives, whether it's at work or otherwise, on pedestals. And the truth is that everybody is human, and the opinions that our loved ones, as well-meaning as they are, the opinions of our loved ones are based upon their own beliefs and their own life experiences. That's why it is so, so critical for us to honor those intuitive feelings, to honor what our heart is telling us that we need to do in terms of change.
It is so true. And I think we need to drive this point home. I get often clients who accept more work than they should, both at home with their spouses or partners and in the workplace. So these clients are doing more, they're over delivering, and the result is burnout. They're burnout. But here's the kicker. They're actually stuffing it, and they're not letting other people see it. And oftentimes they're even volunteering for things. Even though they've got more than enough on their own plate, they're overachievers and they're people pleasers combined. So they just do everything possible. And when they come to me, they open up about exactly what's bugging them, where they'll say, I really have been working every night. I'm the one who closes, or I'm taking on the hardest clients. And my boss isn't giving work to my colleague who barely has anything to do. And I'm feeling a lot of resentment, and I'm starting to get really angry about this. But I don't understand why my boss doesn't balance the workload more equally, or doesn't change, or always ask me to do everything. And I said, well, probably because you've been showing your boss for a long time that you're willing to do everything. And your colleague there is a slacker, and your colleague is quietly smirking and watching you do all the work, while she gets away with doing hardly anything, and she knows it. So it comes from your own behavior of developing assertiveness. And for people pleasers, that does not come naturally. It's an acquired behavior that has to be developed and practiced. And the best thing you can do is start practicing with someone who you trust. Practice saying no and doing it without guilt. That has to be added with emphasis, because not only you're taking on more than you should and you've become that person, but you're burned out and you're frustrated and you're stuffing it. You're not taking care of yourself. You're not taking the time you need for your hobbies or enjoyment that you should. And sometimes even for your physical health, where people aren't working out or eating properly because they took on too much work, either at home or in the workplace. I see it all the time. So we've got to practice saying no. But if you do that and you feel so guilty that you just feel like I've let everyone down and I can't sleep because I feel so guilty, and I'm going to call them right back and say, I changed my mind. I can come in and do that, or I can go to work, or I can do this and that. And I'm like, no. So it's not just enough to practice and learn to be assertive. You have to also learn how to get over your guilt. And how do you get over your guilt is by, again, going back to self-love, realizing how you need to tank your own body and mind where you can give other people what they need. So put your own oxygen mask on first is a popular saying.
It's so true, though. And leading into my next question, which is for those who are feeling called to make a change in their life, right? They're feeling called to make a bigger impact. What is your number one piece of advice that you would give to someone who is looking at taking that leap to make such a big change?
Great question. The first thing I would personally do on my own is to start journaling and being in touch with my feelings more often. And that begins maybe with thoughts, and to have those kind of thoughts and allow yourself to free flow your own feelings is not a natural thing for people who are overachievers and people pleasers. They're used to stuffing their head with their to-do lists. And so they're busy all the time. And so first and foremost, I would highly recommend that they carve out time where they give themselves permission just to feel their own thoughts, and eventually take a notebook with them. So here's my homework for people listening who are like, oh, that sounds like me. I'm very overly busy and stressed, and I don't put myself first, is to go for walks. And on those walks, just make sure it's peaceful and you just allow yourself to just feel real feelings, and eventually take a little notebook with you and find a quiet bench and sit down. And at first, maybe nothing will come out, but if you make it a habit, you're giving your body and mind permission to put yourself first, and the thoughts will start coming out. And once you've done that, you're going to come to some amazing conclusions all on your own. Because as you said, Jennifer, you already actually have the answers. But these answers are so stuffed down and tied up. It's like I have a jewelry box, and every once in a while we move or something and the jewelry box gets turned over, and then I have to open it and all my necklaces are all knotted together, and I have to patiently sit and unknot all my necklaces.
Wow.
The chain. Have you ever had that? It's so annoying.
Yes.
And it takes a lot of time and patience.
Yes, and it takes forever. The advice that you gave about the journaling is fantastic, because it's true. We need an outlet with which to allow ourselves to process our feelings. And the other thing that is also a fantastic practice to implement is meditation, because we need to, it's so critical for our well-being to make that space for ourselves. And especially doing meditation in the mornings can really help set the tone for our day too.
100%. And I have to say that every single client that I've coached has the same thing, is they have some small signs that maybe aren't noticeable for someone who isn't trained to see them, of nervousness on them. And the first sign of nervousness is squirming around. They can't sit still. The second sign of nervousness is eye contact. Their eyes flit back and forth. And the third sign is fidgeting with something in their hand. They have to be tapping, or of course, a lot of them are holding their phones and like, oh, excuse me. And they're like kind of checking I'm like, what the heck? So meditation calms down your nervous system. And so what you said is so important. And so if you can go out and take walks in nature, you can journal and you can meditate without doing anything further, you may actually solve your own problem.
Oh, life-changing, completely life-changing. I have loved having you with us today. How can someone find you?
The best way to find me is probably my website, KristaMollion.com, which I'm sure you can get in your show notes. On there, you'll have all my contact information. You'll also find links to my podcast, my YouTube channel. When I publish my book link will be up there. I also do a number of workshops. Right now, I'm doing some online workshops, but I'm actually going to start doing live workshops pretty soon. So I'm super excited.
That's exciting.
So everyone can see me in some way, shape, or form. And of course, my social media handles are all on there. And don't hesitate to reach out to me. If any of this resonates with you, reach out to Jennifer or me, because if anything I've learned to conclude this podcast interview, my message to you would be that you are good enough. And you do deserve full happiness. You have no excuse not to put yourself first and start living your life. Your spouse, your boss, your children. I know that there are people counting on you, but if you are unhappy, you will never be able to serve them in full capacity either. So be happy, be yourself, and love yourself.
Thank you for that message. And it's true. Change starts with a decision. It starts with setting an intention. And there's no one that can do that for us except for us. Thank you so much, Krista, for joining us. It's truly been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you for listening to the Awake and On Purpose podcast. Please visit us and subscribe to the podcast at awakeandonpurpose.com so you never miss an episode. To learn more about how you can connect with your higher purpose and take that leap of faith to make your impact in the world, visit us at jenniferspor.com. And while you're there, be sure to join our email list for exclusive offers and a weekly dose of inspiration.